Hi everybody, I'm introducing the color schemes that we're going to be working with in Milestone 5 Design Fundamentals final project. And I'll get to the variations possible with some examples in a moment. But first I want to make sure that you understand that in Milestone 5, Task 2, here's my initial post, I reiterate the 4 color scheme options that you have to choose from. So make sure that the 4 different choices that you make, that they are among these. And in Milestone 4, color schemes page, the learning path page, the complementary color schemes are shown here. Complementary pairs in traditional primaries, and I'll review that. That's from the traditional color wheel that we're mostly familiar with from a lifetime of working with paint and crayons and pigments. Red and green, yellow and violet, blue and orange are the 2 complementary color or 3 complementary color pairs of primary and secondary colors in that wheel. Complementary pairs from the additive color system for light processing and light primaries, red and cyan, green, magenta, blue and yellow. Now these are the primary and secondary color pairs that I'll review when we get into this presentation here. But make sure to meet the specifications of the task, whether you're working for a teacher, a customer, or an art director at the job that you work for. Meeting the specs and giving exactly those color options. You have to stay within those parameters to meet the objectives. Okay, so intro to some color schemes. These are 4 color wheels that I made just to show that there are many colors in between the primary and secondary colors. You can keep blending them in small amounts, and then any 2 colors that are directly across from each other are complementary colors. So red and green from the complementary from the traditional wheel, blue and orange, or yellow and violet. And you can also have, a red-violet and a yellow-green. And then even the very fine intermediate colors between, but making sure that they're really closely matched in terms of being complementary. And then so forth and so on with the additive color wheel and the subtractive color wheel that is formulated for printing processes. Now here we have the 3 wheels with the primary and secondary colors laid out, and I want to show you what happens when mixing primaries in each system relative to the media. The traditional wheel is relative to paint and pigments, and that has red, yellow, and blue as the primary colors that are needed to mix the other colors. And you can see what happens when the colors are mixed. We get red and yellow make orange, red and blue make violet, and blue and yellow make green. And when you mix all 3 together, the color neutralizes, so that you get black or something that is often more of a muddy gray color when mixing paints or pigments. With additive light, these are wavelengths of light, and it's very different than what happens when mixing pigment or paint. We have green, blue, and red are the primary colors of the additive color system here, and you can see they're laid out. In the primary, the larger shapes; the secondary, the intermediate shapes there. The smaller shapes there. The green and blue, when that light wavelength is those 2 light wavelengths are combined, make cyan. We don't get a cyan color when we mix any colors of paint together. You can formulate paints that make a cyan color or a magenta color, but you can't mix them from the primary colors. Whereas in the RGB light, blue and red will create magenta, red and green will create yellow. I mean, red and green aren't even primary colors in the traditional paint system, so it takes a while to become familiar with these systems. Now, with the subtractive paints that are formulated for printing inks, and most of us are familiar with these because our home printers, we have the cyan, magenta, and yellow ink, and when mixing those colors together, we get cyan and magenta make blue, cyan and yellow make green, and magenta and yellow make red. And when you mix those colors together, the color neutralizes all 3 of those primaries together, and you get the black, or very often it's more of like a muddy gray, so we add black to our printers to increase the saturation levels. And even the colors themselves are, when they're formulated in the software, are toned down. They're grayed down a little bit to make the colors look a little bit deeper by adding black. So the color schemes, again, these are what our options are. And there are other color schemes that we're not choosing from in this, but we're sticking to these. So achromatic, no color, black, white, and gray. Monochrome, 1 color, its tints, shades, and tones. complementary are two colors directly across from each other on the color wheel, and I showed you examples of those. Now when you place them next to each other, particularly at high saturation and brightness, they produce visual vibration in the cones of the eye, and you get optical effects from that. Analogous are 2 to 3 colors that are next to each other on the color wheel that share properties, and they appear more harmonious, more similar. And warm colors, bright yellow green to yellow orange, red magenta, and red violet, anything that suggests heat or warmth or passion or intensity. Cool, blue violet, blue green, cyan and cyan green, like green grassy slopes. Shade, deep blue skies and seas and lakes. Neutral, desaturated, grayed out, minimal perceptible color. Now some of the examples in the learning path have little pops of brighter color, but overall most of the color in those examples are neutral, but I want to make sure you understand those. The difference. Okay, monochrome here, I'll get to that when I show you examples of neutral. Monochrome, one color. It doesn't matter what color it is, but that color and only its tints, tones, and shades. So a tint, when you mix it with white, a shade, when you mix it with black, it gets darker, right? With white, it gets lighter. And tones can vary depending on how bright the gray mix you add in to create more. It's a more neutralized effect. It doesn't have that high intensity of the brighter red color. If you make a gray pink color and mix it with a dark reddish brown color, it gives a very different effect. Okay, complementary, again, two colors, any two colors across from each other on a color wheel. And I just picked these two, and they have to be directly across. You can't have orange and this blue from the additive color wheel because those are not complementary colors from that color system. So if you're working within a color system, an additive color system or a traditional color system, whatever it is, you have to use the two colors that are directly across from each other on that color wheel. So in the additive wheel, the cyan blue U and the orange are complementary colors. And again, you can vary the saturation, brightness, you can make tones, shades, tints, you can blend the colors together, and the intermediate colors are going to give you kind of the neutralized gray when blending, gray down variations of color. If you're working with pure color and overlapping light wavelengths, you're going to get a very different effect when you're blending the colors together otherwise. Now, a light orange to a dark tone of cyan blue gives you a very different effect than a very bright orange blended to a very bright cyan blue. So lots of ways to work with the color. Oops, skipped one. Here we go. Back to examples of analogous color. Again, 2 or 3 colors next to each other on a color wheel that share properties. It's typically a primary, secondary, and intermediate, or one of these colors, a primary, 2 colors on either side, or a secondary and 2 colors on either side, which would incorporate the primary, secondary, and intermediate. So they share properties, and you can see how they have a more similar feel, harmonious feel. When you are limiting the color schemes, you get a certain mood. Now this is a cool color scheme, this is a warm to cool color scheme, and this one is a warm to cool color scheme, but they're all analogous colors from different examples on these color wheels. Here we have warm and cool, right? So with warm and cool, we want to make sure that we understand the warm colors are closer to anything that suggests heat, or the idea, the emotional associations that we have, like passion and intensity and joy and brightness and energy. And then the cool colors that we associate with maybe things that are more calm, harmoniously organized, for example, steady, or thoughtful, intellectual, there are, versus passionate, right? Calm, cool, and collected, right? So we have associations with color, and so by using color to express those emotional as well as temperature sensibilities, we want to understand how limiting warm or cool color schemes can give us those kinds of upbeat, energetic, high intensity heat and vividness. So expressing colors by picking only warm colors and mixing them together. Now I just chose some different options here for you to take a look at how they are affecting the sense of warmth in the color blends. Here we have cool color schemes. So the cool, deep green to blue, that gives you almost a sense of nature. This one, cool, deep violet to a light cyan. It might be a setting sun on a crisp day, early spring or winter. This might be a different kind of a feeling, a temperature feeling. And then a bright cyan green to a cyan blue tone that might be more tropical in feel. This might make you feel like it's a really warm, sunny day. So there are all kinds of different ways of using color intensity, the saturation, the brightness, whether it's light or dark. And the HSB sliders, hue, saturation, brightness sliders, are a great way to control the saturation and brightness levels of color for mixing. Now these are the borderline colors in between, right? So that line that goes right through those borderline colors, you have to use those judiciously because they can go either warm or cool. For example, this warm magenta red or red violet color, when it is really high intensity, bright and saturated, it feels like it's a warm color. But here, if this is the same color, but it's toned down to a darker tone, grayed out, so that gives it a very cool feel, right? And here, this yellow-green color, when you darken it down, it feels cooler. But if you brighten it up, the same light yellow-green color, if you brighten it up, increase the saturation, brightness, add a lot of light to it, it feels warmer. Although it's still technically, this would technically still be a cooler color blended to a warmer color, but it gives a very different effect than when the color is very, very bright and saturated. The magenta red color. So you get it, and conversely, the yellow green color, lighter, it feels warmer even though it's technically more on the cool side. So warmer, again, saturating it up, popping it so it's more fully saturated. This one has more white in it, so it's more pastel. Then that warms it up even further. And then the same thing with a light violet color. If you really brighten it up, it feels warmer even though it's technically more on the cool side. But when you take those same colors, cool them down, darken them down, it gives a very different cool effect. So these are borderline colors used with a warmer cast, a warmer effect, and cooler, the same colors used given a cooler effect. Now let's get into neutral colors. I desaturated the color wheels to show you how taking away the high intensity of any color gives it that neutral feel. Even though we still see hints of color, right? The ability to make colors feel more toned down, cool, quiet, somewhat conservative, sophisticated, cold even, is by desaturating the color. So northern climates where there are winters, often the colors that people wear most of the year are more neutral, right? And the color of buildings, for example, are more neutral. When you go to southern climates, tropical places, people paint their houses brilliant colors. Not to say that someone who is living in a very cold place can't paint their house a bright magenta or bright orange color. They certainly do in some cases, but mostly the idea of blending into the landscape where things tend to be cooler and grayed down, people have that tendency in ways that express the atmosphere, the temperature of the climate. So there's a lot of things to understand about how color works. Neutralized color, more sophisticated, more business-like. Warmer, brighter colors are often considered to be more vibrant, people going out to party, that sort of thing. Children's colors are often brighter. So there's a lot to play with in terms of how we use neutral colors. And any of the colors can be neutralized by toning them way down. And then how to play with your colors and your design. This is a photograph that my friend took of me underwater, playing around and playing with the photograph in the software and then adding different color to it. I can create different kinds of color mode, and then by using filters, the cutout filters, various filters, I simplified the photograph so that I can more easily add colors to the shapes and control how the color is applied. And then I added some spheres to give the effects of, this is either a monochrome color scheme or a warm analogous color scheme. Here's a warm and cool color scheme. This one is also a warm and cool color scheme, and this is a neutral color scheme. This one is a more of an analogous color scheme if you're using the blue violet through the blue green here. and this one's very neutralized, so it gives very different effects, right? And then when we're going towards the final project where we have typeface, all of the color and the typeface have to work in concert within those color schemes. So cool colors, warm and cool colors, neutral colors, these are monochrome red colors. So you get the idea that using color will create different mood in the same image, and which one is going to best express your event poster, and the colors that you use in both the typeface and the image all have to work in concert within that color scheme, and then you pick which one best represents the idea that you're trying to convey. All right, I hope that's helpful.